lot has been said about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that it's a grandiose, fate-changing, god-defying adventure, it's a jaw-dropping experience, it's a masterpiece. People are saying that with Rebirth, a new legend in the history of games is born, that it's the finest tribute that a classic could ever receive. And while I wish I was as good a journalist to come up with such original and descriptive words, I'll just say that it's a Square Enix-Ass game. And you may be wondering, what makes a Square Enix-Ass game? Well, after doing some research of hundreds of games they've released in over 40 years, I can say with 100% confidence that what makes a Square Enix game is belts. For real though, Square Enix makes a point of innovating with each iteration. No Final Fantasy has ever had the same characters or universe as the previous one. As much as I'd like to have a new version of Final Fantasy XII every year, we always get a new cast, a new world, and new game mechanics. This element of innovation makes it pretty hard to pinpoint what Square Enix is. I've noticed that people are attached to whichever Final Fantasy they played first. I'm sure that's why so many people actually love 10, because otherwise I don't really get what you see in this game. Anyway, my first Final Fantasy was 12. It's the game that got me into the franchise. Heck, it's the game that got me into RPGs. So what I expect from a Final Fantasy title is hunting boards, a massive open world, and a cast of pretty characters. Maybe they have a flying boat, too. I'm looking at you both here. I'm looking at you. But if you played Final Fantasy VII first, maybe you associate the franchise with anti-corpo messages, big-ass swords, and materia. What I'm saying is, Final Fantasy does something different each time a new game comes around. But some elements tend to make a comeback, like Muggles, summons, chocobos, and even weapon names. This is partly what makes Final Fantasy XIV, the critically acclaimed MMO, so successful. It celebrates a bunch of tropes from the franchise. You have flying ships, memorable characters, weapons, mounts. Every time the Final Fantasy XIV team announces a new expansion, as Final Fantasy fans swarm to it like moths to the flame, they always sneak in a little nod to a beloved game. It's like they know how to reel us in. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth hit the bullseye because it gets the very essence of what makes a Final Fantasy game tick. It's got Muggles, it's got chocobos, it's got a big open world, it's got big ass swords, it's got flying ships, and a cast of very attractive characters. It caters to the die-hard Final Fantasy VII lore fans, who played every single game imaginable and bemoaned the ones that got taken down, even though, let's face it, they probably were not that great. It also appeals to the general Final Fantasy fans, like me, who just want to see those core elements play out. And it also does a good enough job of hooking people who just want to pour all their free time into a 200-hour-long open-world JRPG. But it does all of that without losing the Square Enix essence. The sappy lines, the overly convoluted storylines, they're all there. But they managed to bring down the sap a notch so we don't find ourselves in a Strangers of Paradise situation. They also managed to make the story digestible enough so we're not completely lost, like in Final Fantasy XIII. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is Square Enix at its best. Sure, you can argue that Rebirth also borrows a page or two from other games.
Ariana, what are you doing here?
Still, one thing is certain. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a better pirate game than Skull and Bones. I mean, the scores don't lie. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has been praised by critics and players alike, and after playing for an alarming number of hours, I'm not surprised. It's a massive game that keeps your brain engaged at all times. There's puzzles that make you think, there's dialogue options that quiz you on whether you were actually paying attention to a character's feelings or not, and there are even quests with multiple handover options. One quest asks you to pick a liar among a group of students in jail. It's called the Swindling Seminar. And unless you're actually paying attention, you can't just Google the answer because it's a different line of dialogue each time. There's a quest in Gongaga in which you help Cisne cook and...
Wow, that's a smell.
You have to pluck some mushrooms, right? With a specific minigame, which we'll get into those in a minute. The patterns for plucking the mushrooms are randomly generated each time. I can't just Google and copy a guide, because guess what?
Wow.
This kind of quest design is what sets Final Fantasy VII Rebirth apart from previous iterations that relied on fetch quests. Sure, these fetch quests sometimes dropped a strong plot point every now and then, but having to pick up grapes from the ground in Final Fantasy XVI doesn't hit as hard as plucking mushrooms in Rebirth, because the devs actually created a specific mechanic for this single side quest. And it's not just puzzles that keep you engaged either. Something as simple as traversal is a challenge, albeit a welcome one. One night, I was pretty tired. I wanted to do something that didn't require any brain work. I just wanted to turn my mind off and kick back for a bit. So, I put up Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and decided to do some open world activities. There are a ton of them, so I better catch up, right?
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
Completing side activities requires you to understand the environment. You have to look at your surroundings and the map to decide how you can actually get somewhere. The terrain isn't flat, and sometimes the only way to get somewhere is through hopping on a mushroom with your chocobo. I'm not making this up, I swear. They actually figured out a way to make maps useful instead of a clutch. I can't just look at the minimap and go from place A to place B without having my chocobo go. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is not a game you can play with your brain off. Not the side activities, not the story bits, and definitely not the combat. If anything, the game is so engaging, it actually makes you want to wake up so you can properly play it, especially the minigames. Rebirth is a minigame galore. There are a few times in which I will say I had enough of them.
Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one.
But that's mostly because Costa del Sol, a resort full of minigames, takes place right before the casino fun of the Golden Saucer, which is, unsurprisingly, also full of minigames. I think it would have been better for the game's spacing if they had spaced the minigame focused areas out a bit better. Because the silly minigames are what makes Final Fantasy VII Rebirth side content feel like a breath of fresh air next to other games. In Gongaga, you run into an old lady who asks you to fetch her chickens. It's not a frying pan this time, but it definitely brought back some familiar flavors. And then a minigame starts, asking you to lure the chickens back to the hen using a feeder. It's honestly not Rebirth's most fun moment. It's annoying to get it wrong and hear Brad go,
Aww, after I worked so hard to find it.
like, shut up, Brad, I'm trying, okay? Anyway, you reel the chickens in, they're pretty close anyway, and Brad's like, oh, there's one more out in the open. And you go out in the Gongaga jungle, and the game's like, cool, you found it. Now, lure it back into the hen. And that's pretty much when you look at the screen like,
You're joking. You're joking.
but it turns out that Square Enix is, in fact, joking. Because a dinosaur pops out of nowhere and the chicken decides he's better off running back home.
Thank you.
They can be a handful, and chasing them really works up the appetite. So allow me to whip you up some of... Huh?
Yeah, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is irreverent like that. But let's get into the main story, what the game is actually all about. Following the events of the previous game, Zack Fair reaches Midgar with a comatose Cloud, and it is revealed that he resides in a timeline where the end of the world is imminent as a result of the planet's Mako having been completely depleted. Shinra has captured Barret and Tifa, while Brad sacrifices himself to get...
Say, can you spare a minute?
Not really.
Rebirth is the ultimate road trip game. You just grab your buddies and travel the world through land, water, dolphin, and air. After playing Final Fantasy XII, I was upset that not every RPG out there was about leaving your hometown with a party of friends to explore the world. What do you mean Dragon Age Inquisition won't just let me walk out the city gates to visit these places on foot? I don't want to pick a place from this map and fast travel there. Wait, so I'm just Geralt of Rivia? What about... I don't get a party of people to banter with? I would even dare say that I enjoyed Final Fantasy XIII more than 16, simply because I had a decent party of likable characters with me in that one. Don't get me wrong, there are times in which 16 looks like a masterpiece, but not even Cid can carry the empty void of meaningful party companions. Not even if he's hot like that. Sorry, buddy. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth understands this road trip formula and executes it masterfully. Its characters have got chemistry for days, they interact with you, they converse amongst each other. You even get a cute romance option, Tifa. Yes, she's the only option actually. At the end of the day, you'll fall in love with every character, regardless of whether you like them individually or not. So yeah, I'm really at awe at how Square Enix created a game that can simultaneously borrow elements from other games, bring back a ton of elements from previous Final Fantasy games, and introduce its own share of new mechanics to spice things up. All this leads to a game that appeals to absolutely everyone, regardless of whether you want to sell your soul to a massive turn-based open world or play a linear action RPG. She's a people pleaser, but she still stays true to her core.